name is Ethan. I am 42 years old, and I used to be a wilderness guide. Before that, I was a sergeant in the United States Army, with 2 tours overseas as a ranger. I say used to be because I do not go into the woods anymore. I live in a city now, surrounded by concrete and steel and the constant, reassuring hum of other people. I need the noise. I cannot stand the silence. The silence is what I remember most from the beginning of it all. This happened 7 years ago, in a stretch of national forest so deep in the Cascade Mountains that most maps just showed it as a uniform green patch. It was a place I knew well, or thought I did. I had been going there since I was a boy, and later, I would take clients on multi-day treks into its deeper basins. But this trip was personal. It was just me and 3 friends, a long weekend in late September before the first heavy snows came to shut down the high country roads for the season. There was Jake, who had been a Marine corporal.
We had met years after our service at a veterans outreach program and bonded over a shared love for the backcountry. Jake was solid. He was quiet, competent, and the only person I knew who could keep pace with me on a forced march. Then there was Brian, a friend of Jake's from his civilian job as an engineer. Brian was the opposite of Jake. He was loud, perpetually cheerful, and treated the wilderness like a big, green amusement park. He was a good man, but he lacked a certain respect for the quiet power of the place. With him was his girlfriend, Megan. She was a nice woman, a nurse from the city, but this was her first real camping trip. She was nervous, and she was trying very hard not to show it. The drive-in was long. We left the highway an hour outside of civilization and spent the next 3 hours navigating a labyrinth of gravel fire roads and old, forgotten logging tracks. My truck, a heavy-duty 4x4, handled the ruts and washouts without complaint. Brian, in the passenger seat, kept a running commentary on the sheer nothingness of it all. He joked about banjo music and inbred locals, the kind of city-dweller humor that always felt out of place to me out here. Jake and Megan were quiet in the back seat, watching the endless walls of Douglas fir and western hemlock slide by. "Are you sure this road even goes anywhere, Ethan?" Brian asked, craning his neck to look at the GPS on his phone, which had lost its signal an hour ago. "Feels like we're driving off the edge of the world." "That's the point, Brian," I said, easing the truck over a series of deep potholes. "The spot I'm taking you to, nobody goes there. The old bridge washed out a decade ago, so you can only get there this way if you know the route. It's worth it." I believed it then. The spot was a small, level clearing next to a glacial creek, tucked into a box canyon. It was pristine, a piece of untouched earth. My piece. We arrived in the late afternoon. The air was crisp and smelled of pine and damp earth. The sound of the creek was a constant, gentle rush. As we got out of the truck, the first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful quiet I was used to, but a heavy, watchful silence. The birds were not singing. The usual chatter of squirrels and chipmunks was absent. It was a small thing, a detail that probably only I registered, but it was like a single string on a guitar being slightly out of tune. It was wrong. Brian, of course, noticed nothing. He stretched dramatically and took a deep breath. "Ah, fresh air. Last one to get their tent up buys the first round of whiskey," he declared, already pulling his brand new, brightly colored tent from its bag. Megan smiled weakly, looking at the towering, dark trees that pressed in on our little clearing. Jake gave me a quick, questioning look. He had felt it too. I just gave a slight shake of my head, a silent signal to let it go for now. It was probably nothing. A predator in the area, maybe a cougar, could easily put the smaller animals on high alert. We set up our camp in a practiced, efficient rhythm,
At least Jake and I did. We had 2 heavy-duty canvas tents, the kind built for all seasons. We pitched them near the center of the clearing, about 20 feet apart. Brian struggled with his complex dome tent, its flexible poles whipping around in the slight breeze. Megan tried to help, but they mostly got in each other's way. Jake and I finished our work and then went over to help them, untangling the mess and getting their shelter properly staked down. By the time we were done, the sun was beginning to dip below the high ridge of the canyon. The temperature dropped quickly. I got a fire going in the stone ring I had built on a previous trip, its flames a welcome bubble of light and warmth against the encroaching twilight. We settled into our camp chairs, and Brian, true to his word, poured 4 generous measures of bourbon into tin cups.
"To the wilderness," he toasted, holding his cup high, "and to getting away from spreadsheets for 3 whole days." We all drank. The whiskey burned a pleasant trail down my throat, and for a moment I let myself relax. The fire crackled, the creek murmured. Maybe I had been imagining things. This was what it was all about. Peace, solitude. The normalcy lasted for about 2 hours. We cooked steaks over the fire, told stories, and listened to the night settle in. The sky was a spray of brilliant stars, unobscured by city lights. Megan seemed to be relaxing, pointing out constellations she recognized. Brian was in his element, telling a long, rambling story about a disastrous work project. Jake and I were mostly quiet, enjoying the fire. Then we heard the first sound. It came from high up on the canyon wall to the north. It started as a low howl, deep and resonant like a wolf. But I had heard wolves my entire life. Their howls are mournful, almost melodic. This was not that. This was raw, guttural, filled with a kind of resonant power that seemed to vibrate in my chest cavity. The howl climbed in pitch, holding a single, impossibly long note before it broke. And the sound it broke into was not animal. It was a choked, wet, gurgling noise, like something was being strangled and was trying to scream at the same time. The sound echoed off the canyon walls, seeming to come from all directions at once. Then, silence. The real silence this time. Even the creek seemed to have gone quiet. Every nerve in my body went rigid. I had my hand on the hilt of the large knife on my belt before I even realized I had moved. "What in God's name was that?" Megan whispered, her voice trembling. Her face was pale in the firelight. Brian laughed, a short, nervous bark. "Probably just a coyote with a sore throat. Or a mountain lion. They make some weird sounds, right, Ethan?" He was looking to me for reassurance, his usual bravado gone. "Mountain lions can scream," I said, keeping my voice level. "But I've never heard one make a sound like that. Not the first part, anyway." I looked at Jake. His face was a stone mask, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the fire. He knew, just as I did, that what we had heard was not on the list of known North American fauna. We sat there for a long time, listening. The woods remained unnaturally still. The feeling of being watched was no longer a subtle impression. It was a palpable pressure against my skin. Eventually, the tension became too much to bear. I stood up. "I'm going to put some more wood on the fire," I announced, my voice louder than intended. "Keep it burning bright. Jake, you and I will take first watch." Brian scoffed, trying to reclaim his earlier swagger. "A watch? Come on, man. It was probably just an elk or something. You're being paranoid." "Humor me," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. "Go get in your tent with Megan. Zip it up tight." My words had the desired effect. The forced confidence drained from Brian's face, replaced by a flicker of real fear. He nodded, and he and Megan quickly retreated into their tent.
The zipper was a loud, jarring sound in the quiet. Jake and I sat by the fire, our hunting rifles across our laps. We did not speak. There was nothing to say. We both knew the rules of the wild. We were in something else's territory, and it had just announced its presence. We listened, straining to hear anything over the crackle of the flames and the rush of the creek. The hours crawled by. The woods gave up nothing. At around 2 a.m, convinced it was a one-off event, we agreed to get some sleep. We doused the fire to embers and retired to our tent. But I did not sleep. I lay in my sleeping bag, my rifle next to me, listening to the suffocating silence. The next morning, the sun rose into a clear blue sky. The world looked normal again. The birds were even singing.
It was easy to believe we had imagined the whole thing, a trick of the acoustics in the canyon. Brian was certainly in that camp. He emerged from his tent yawning and immediately started making jokes about our spooky ghost watch. "You guys should have seen yourselves," he chuckled, pouring water into a pot for coffee. "Sitting there like soldiers waiting for an ambush. I bet it was a fox. I read they can scream." "It wasn't a fox, Brian," Jake said quietly, his back to us as he stared at the creek bank. He had been up before any of us, scouting the perimeter of the camp. "What is it?" I asked, walking over to join him. He did not say anything. He just pointed. There, in the soft, damp earth near the water's edge, were tracks. They were massive. The individual print was almost 18 inches long, vaguely canine in shape, but with a distinct heel pad and 5 long, slender toes that had dug deep into the mud. The claws, or what I assumed were claws, had left gouges that were at least 3 inches long. But the most disturbing part was the stride. The prints were in a straight line, one directly in front of the other. The distance between them was over 6 feet. This was not a 4-legged animal. This thing walked on 2 legs. I knelt, my blood running cold. I had tracked every animal in these mountains: bear, elk, moose, cougar. Nothing made a track like this. A bear track is wide, flat-footed. This was narrow, elongated, and the bipedal gait. It was impossible. Brian came over, his smile fading as he saw what we were looking at. "Whoa, what is that? Is that a bear? That's a huge bear." "Bears don't walk like that," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I stood up and looked around the clearing. I followed the tracks. They came down from the steep northern slope, the one the sound had come from. They walked directly to the creek, then followed it for about 50 yards, passing within 30 feet of our camp. Then they crossed the water and disappeared into the thick brush on the other side. It had watched us. It had circled us while we slept. "Okay, this is weird," Brian admitted, his voice losing its joking edge. "Maybe it's some kind of prank? Someone with fake feet walking around?" "Up that slope," Jake said, gesturing to the nearly vertical canyon wall. "In the dark? And for what? To leave a few tracks for us to find?" "No." Megan had come out of the tent and was standing behind us, her hand over her mouth. "We should leave," she said, her voice shaking. "Ethan, please. I want to go home." I looked at her, then at the tracks, then at the oppressive wall of trees. Part of me, the rational part, was screaming that this was insane. It had to be a bear, a deformed bear, maybe. But my gut, the part of me that had kept me alive in Afghanistan, was telling me something different. It was telling me to listen to Megan. But then my pride, my familiarity with this place, kicked in. I had never been run out of the woods in my life. "We're fine," I said, trying to convince myself as much as them. "Whatever it is, it passed by.
It didn't bother us. We'll be more careful today. We'll stick together. No one goes anywhere alone. We'll pack up and leave first thing in the morning, as planned. It was the worst decision of my life. The rest of the day was thick with a tense, unspoken dread. We tried to act normal. Jake and I did some fishing in the creek, but we stayed within sight of the camp. Brian and Megan sat by the unlit fire pit, talking in low voices. No one suggested a hike. No one wanted to venture more than a few feet from the relative safety of the clearing. The woods felt different now. Every shadow seemed to hold a shape. Every snap of a twig made us jump.
The sun felt cold. As evening approached, a heavy, wet fog began to roll down the canyon, blanketing everything in a damp, gray shroud. The visibility dropped to less than 30 feet. The world shrank to just our small circle of tents and the truck. The fog muffled all sound, creating an eerie, claustrophobic silence. I built the fire up as high as I could, the flames pushing back against the encroaching grayness. We ate a quick, silent dinner of dehydrated meals. No one was hungry. Brian had put the whiskey bottle away. The mood was somber, fearful. We were all just waiting for the sun to go down. We were waiting for the night. The night did not disappoint. The sound started just after full dark. It began with a single, heavy footstep just beyond the ring of firelight in the direction of the creek. A loud thump in the soft earth. We all froze, our heads snapping toward the sound. I grabbed my rifle. Jake did the same. Then came another footstep from the opposite side of the camp, near the trees. Thump. It was circling us. Slowly. Deliberately. The footsteps were heavy. I could feel the faint vibration through the soles of my boots. This was not a stealthy predator. This was a show of force. It wanted us to know it was there. Megan was openly crying now, her face buried in Brian's shoulder. Brian was holding her, his own face a mask of stark terror. He was looking at me, all traces of his earlier skepticism gone. He was looking at me for a solution, and I did not have one. "Get in the truck," I said to him, my voice a low command. "Both of you, now." They scrambled up and ran the 10 feet to my truck, fumbling with the door handle before piling inside. I heard the lock click. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. Jake and I stood back to back in the center of the camp, our rifles pointed out into the swirling fog. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. My ranger training was screaming at me. Identify your target, assess the threat, maintain situational awareness. But I could not see anything. The fog was a solid wall. Then we heard a new sound, a low, wet sniffing. It was close, unbelievably close. It was coming from right behind our tent, not 15 feet from where we stood. Sniff, sniff, sniff. It was a deep, powerful inhalation, the sound of a huge animal tasting the air. I could almost feel its breath on the back of my neck. Jake let out a shaky breath. "Ethan," he whispered, "it's right there." I did not answer. I was trying to control my breathing, trying to fight down the primal terror that was threatening to overwhelm me. I slowly raised my rifle, pointing it at the spot where the sound was coming from. But what was I going to shoot at? A noise in the fog? I pictured a stray round hitting the truck, hitting Megan or Brian. I held my fire. The sniffing sound moved along the side of the tent. We heard the canvas rustle as something brushed against it. It was tall. The sound was at least 6 feet off the ground. Then we heard a scraping sound, metal on metal. It was at the truck. I swung around, my rifle up. Through the fog, I could just make out a dark, massive shape next to the driver's side door. It was huge, impossibly broad at the shoulders. Then we heard the handle of the truck door jiggle. A scream tore from inside the cab. It was Megan. The thing was trying to open the door. It knew what a door handle was. My mind refused to process it. This could not be happening. This was not an animal. Jake reacted first. He fired his rifle into the air. The blast was deafening in the enclosed canyon. The shape at the truck recoiled, melting back into the fog. The footsteps started again, this time faster, retreating back toward the creek. What was that? Oh my God, what was that? Brian yelled from the truck, his voice muffled.
"Stay in the truck," I shouted back, my voice hoarse. "Do not get out."
Jake and I stood in the silence, the ringing in our ears slowly fading. The fog swirled, the fire hissed. For a few minutes, there was nothing. I was starting to hope Jake's warning shot had scared it off for good. Then we heard Brian's voice, closer than it should have been. "Guys, I really have to pee. I can't do it in the truck." He was standing at the passenger door, which was cracked open a few inches. "Brian, get back in the truck now," I ordered. "That is not a request." "I'll be quick," he said, his voice a desperate whine. "I'll just go right here by the tire. I have my flashlight." Before I could stop him, he slipped out of the truck, closing the door quietly behind him. He clicked on a small LED flashlight and moved to the front of the truck, turning his back to the darkness. "Brian, you idiot," Jake hissed. It happened so fast. One moment, Brian was standing there, fumbling with his jeans. The next, a shape exploded out of the fog. It was not the slow, deliberate thing from before. This was a blur of motion, silent and impossibly swift. It came from the direction of the woods, not the creek. There were two of them. The thing that hit Brian was a nightmare given form. In the brief, chaotic sweep of his flashlight beam, I saw it clearly. It stood on two long, digitigrade legs, like a wolf's, but bent backward at the knee. It was at least 8 feet tall, with a gaunt, powerfully muscled torso and arms that were too long for its body, ending in large, human-like hands tipped with black, curving claws. But the head was the worst part. It was the head of a monstrous wolf or dog, with a long snout, pointed ears, and eyes that glowed with a faint yellow light. Its jaws were open, filled with yellow, dagger-like teeth. It did not make a sound. It simply grabbed Brian by the shoulder and the hip, and with a sickening, wet crunch, it twisted. Brian made a single, choked sound, a gasp of surprise and agony. The flashlight flew from his hand, cartwheeling through the air, its beam painting strobing, chaotic images of the attack across the fog. I saw a flash of the creature's face, its lips peeled back in a silent snarl. I saw Brian's body go limp. I saw the second creature, a twin to the first, emerge from the fog behind it. Then the flashlight hit the ground and went out. Megan's screams from inside the truck were a constant, piercing shriek. Jake and I were frozen for a split second, paralyzed by the sheer horror of what we had just witnessed. Then our training kicked in. We raised our rifles and fired. We emptied our magazines in the direction of the sound, the muzzle flashes illuminating nothing but swirling fog. The roar of the guns was a desperate attempt to drive back the impossible. We heard a furious, high-pitched yelp of pain, followed by a deep, enraged roar that was nothing like the howl from the night before. This was pure, guttural fury. There was a sound of something heavy being dragged quickly across the ground and into the trees. Then silence, except for Megan's hysterics and the echo of our gunshots fading down the canyon. Brian was gone. "Reload!" I yelled at Jake, my hands shaking so badly I could barely work the bolt on my rifle. I slammed a fresh magazine home. Jake did the same, his face grim, his movements mechanical. "They took him," he said, his voice hollow. "They just took him." "Get to the truck," I said, grabbing his arm and pulling him. "We're getting out of here." We backed toward the truck, rifles pointed into the darkness. The fog was our enemy. It could be 10 feet away and we would not see it. We reached the truck. I wrenched the driver's side door open and shoved Jake toward the passenger side. "Get in! Cover me!" I slid into the driver's seat, my keys already in my hand. My fingers felt like clumsy sausages. I jammed the key into the ignition and twisted.
The engine turned over, the headlights cutting two bright, useless cones into the thick fog. Megan was in the back seat, curled into a ball, sobbing uncontrollably. As Jake was scrambling into the passenger seat, one of the creatures charged out of the fog. It was the one we had heard yelp. It was limping slightly, favoring its left leg, but it was still terrifyingly fast. It was not coming for us. It was going for the front passenger side tire. It slammed its shoulder into the front fender, the impact rocking the heavy truck. It lowered its head and bit into the tire. There was a loud bang as the tire exploded, the rubber tearing with a sound like canvas ripping. The creature snarled, shaking its head, and then it looked up. It looked right at me through the windshield. Its eyes were not just glowing, they were intelligent. They were filled with a cold, calculating hatred. It knew what it had done. It had disabled our escape. Jake, who was only halfway into the truck, swung his rifle around and fired from the hip. The shot hit the creature square in the chest. The bullet, a .30-06 soft point, should have knocked a grizzly bear off its feet. The creature staggered back a single step, a dark stain spreading on its coarse, gray-black fur. It looked down at its chest, a look of what I can only describe as annoyance on its face. Then it looked back at Jake and let out a roar that vibrated through the frame of the truck. It lunged for him. Jake fell backward into the seat, trying to bring his rifle to bear. The creature's long arm shot through the open door, its claws reaching for him. I did not think. I reacted. I had a heavy-barreled revolver, a .44 Magnum, in the center console for bear defense. I grabbed it, aimed, and fired all 6 rounds into the creature's head and upper torso. The noise inside the cab was apocalyptic. The creature shrieked, a sound of agony and rage, and recoiled, pulling its arm out of the truck. I saw that its forearm was mangled, and its face was a mess of blood. It staggered back into the fog and disappeared. "Go!" Jake yelled, slamming the door shut. "Just go! Drive!" "The tire's blown!" I screamed back, putting the truck in gear. The truck lurched forward, pulling hard to the right. The rim of the wheel screeched against the gravel. I fought the steering wheel, flooring the accelerator. We were moving, but it was slow, a wounded beast trying to flee. Then the other one appeared. It came from the side, from the woods, and it ran alongside the truck. It was keeping pace with us easily, its long legs eating up the ground. It was not attacking. It was hurting us. It was trying to force us off the narrow track toward the steep drop-off into the creek. I saw its strategy in an instant. It was intelligent. It was a hunter. "Hold on!" I yelled. I cranked the wheel hard to the left, away from the creature, and the truck skidded, the rear end fishtailing wildly. The creature leaped back to avoid being hit. In that moment, I saw an opportunity. I had a box of road flares in the glove compartment. "Jake, flares! Get the flares!" I shouted, wrestling with the wheel. The truck was barely controllable on 3 tires. Jake fumbled with the glove box, his hands slick with sweat. He pulled out the box and ripped it open. "What do I do?" he yelled over the grinding of the wheel rim and Megan's continued sobbing. "Light one! Throw it at it!" He pulled a flare out, fumbled with the cap, and struck the igniter. The flare erupted with an intense, brilliant red light, flooding the cab and the fog outside with a hellish crimson glow. The creature, which had been pacing us again, recoiled from the sudden light, shielding its eyes with one of its long arms. It let out a hiss of anger. "Throw it!" I screamed. Jake tossed the flare out his window. It landed on the ground right in the creature's path. It leaped back, snarling at the intensely bright, sputtering light. Another one, I yelled. Jake lit a second flare and threw it, then a third. We created a wall of blinding chemical fire on the right side of the road. The creature would not cross it. It stopped, a towering silhouette against the red glare, and watched us go, its chest heaving. It let out one last, long, frustrated roar that followed us as we lumbered down the logging track. The drive out was the longest hour of my life. The truck bucked and screamed, the damaged wheel threatening to tear itself from the axle at any moment. I did not dare go faster than 10 miles per hour. Every shadow the headlights cut from the fog was a monster. Every sound was the creature, returned to finish the job. Megan's sobs eventually subsided into a quiet, hiccuping whimper. Jake sat rigid in the passenger seat, his rifle across his lap, his knuckles white. He just kept staring out the window into the darkness. I do not know how we made it. The truck held together. The creatures did not follow. After what felt like an eternity, the gravel road widened, and I saw the blessed, beautiful sight of a yellow line painted on pavement. We had reached the main Forest Service road. I did not stop. I drove for another 45 minutes, the ruined tire flapping and screeching, until I saw the lights of a small town ahead. I pulled into the parking lot of the first lighted building I saw, a 24-hour diner attached to a gas station. I killed the engine. In the sudden silence, the only sound was the ticking of the cooling engine and Megan's ragged breathing. We were covered in dirt and sweat. The inside of the truck smelled of gunpowder and fear. I got out of the truck on shaking legs. A man who was pumping gas stared at me, at my truck with its shredded tire and the dark stains on the passenger door that I knew were not mud. I ignored him. I pulled out my phone. I had a signal. I dialed 911. The dispatcher's calm, professional voice on the other end of the line felt like it was from another planet. I tried to explain what had happened. My voice was a wreck. I told her there had been an animal attack, that our friend was gone, that we needed help. 2 sheriff's deputies arrived 20 minutes later. They were both young, professional, and looked at us with a mixture of pity and suspicion. I told them the story, all of it. I told them about the howl, the tracks, the bipedal creatures with the heads of wolves. I watched their faces as I spoke. I saw the moment they stopped believing me. It was early in the story. It was probably around the part where I mentioned the 6-foot stride. They separated us. They put me in the back of one patrol car, Jake in the other. They had a female officer come to speak with Megan, who was nearly catatonic. I gave my statement again, trying to be as calm and factual as possible. I talked about my military background, my experience as a guide. I was trying to establish credibility. It did not work. The lead deputy, a man named Richards, had a notepad out, but he was not writing much. "So, Mr. Miller," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "you're telling me you and your friends were attacked by, what exactly? Werewolves?" "I'm telling you what I saw," I said, my temper starting to fray. "They were 8 feet tall. They walked on 2 legs. They were intelligent. They took our friend." "Right. And your friend Mr. Chen, the Marine, he saw the same thing?" "Yes," I said, "he did." "And your other friend, Brian, you're sure he was taken? You didn't just get separated in the fog?" The rage that went through me was white hot. We watched it happen. We saw the thing kill him and drag his body away. His blood is on my truck. They took our rifles as evidence. They impounded my truck. They took us to the county sheriff's office in a larger town an hour away. We spent the rest of the night and most of the next day in separate interview rooms, telling the same impossible story over and over to different detectives. They treated us like suspects, then like drunks, then finally like traumatized victims who were hallucinating.
They had a doctor check us for drug use. The tests came back clean. Late in the afternoon, the sheriff himself came in to talk to me. He was an older man with a tired, weathered face. "Son," he said, sitting down across the table from me, "we sent a deputy and a fish and wildlife officer up that logging road. The fog is lifted. They went as far as they could in their vehicle. They found the campsite." He paused, looking at me. "They found tracks. Big ones. Bear tracks," the officer said. "A very large black bear."
They also found your friend. My heart stopped. "Brian? He's alive?" The sheriff shook his head slowly. "No, son. I'm sorry. They found what was left of him. The bear it had gotten to him. It looks like he wandered off to relieve himself, and a bear surprised him in the fog. It's a tragic accident." I just stared at him. A bear. They were calling it a bear. "Did they find the creatures?" I asked, my voice flat. "The ones that attacked us?" "There were no other creatures, Ethan," the sheriff said gently. "The officer said the scene is consistent with a predatory bear attack, a very aggressive one. It even went after your truck. It's not unheard of. Your friend, Miss Vance, she's pretty shaken up. She's talking about monsters. It's a common trauma response. The mind plays tricks on you in a situation like that." They were gaslighting me.
They were creating a story that fit their world, and they were erasing mine. "That's not what happened," I said. "There were two of them. They were smart. They disabled the truck. We shot one of them multiple times." "The officer found a dead bear a quarter-mile from your campsite," the sheriff continued, his voice patient. "A big male. It had several gunshot wounds. Looks like you got him. You probably saved your own lives. But that's all it was. A bear." I felt a profound sense of helplessness wash over me. They had their story. They had their dead bear. They had neatly packaged our nightmare into a box they could understand. We were the lucky survivors of a tragic animal attack. Brian was the unfortunate victim. Case closed. They released us later that evening. They gave us our wallets and phones and told us we could retrieve our personal effects from the camp in a few days.
They were keeping the rifles in the truck for the time being as part of the investigation. As we were leaving, a much older deputy, a man with a creased face and kind eyes, who had been quiet during the whole ordeal, caught my arm. He pulled me aside, out of earshot of the others. "Listen to me, son," he said in a low voice. "I'm retiring in 2 months. I don't care what they put in that report. I've worked this county for 30 years. That part of the forest, people go missing up there. More than they should. They write it off as accidents, hikers getting lost. But the stories, they're always a little strange." He looked me dead in the eye. "You and your friend are lucky to be alive. Whatever you saw, I believe you saw it. Now, you take my advice. You don't ever go back there. You hear me? Some places aren't meant for us." He squeezed my arm, then turned and walked away before I could respond. It was the only validation I ever received. Brian's death was officially ruled an animal attack. Megan, traumatized and broken, gave a confused statement that was dismissed as hysteria. She went back to the city, and we never heard from her again. Jake and I corroborated each other's stories, but in the face of the official narrative, we just looked like two guys with a shared delusion. They eventually gave me my truck back. I sold it the next day. I could not stand to even look at it. That was 7 years ago. I live here now, in this apartment overlooking a busy street. The sound of traffic never stops, and I am grateful for it. I tried to go back to guiding, but I could not.
The first time I stepped into the woods after that trip, I had a panic attack so severe I thought I was dying. The silence, the shadows between the trees, they are not peaceful to me anymore. They are threatening. They are full of watching eyes. Jake is still my friend. We are the only two people on Earth who know what really happened in that canyon.
We do not talk about it much. We do not have to. It is a presence that sits between us whenever we meet, a shared scar on our souls. I suffer from nightmares. I wake up seeing those yellow eyes, that long snouted face. I hear that sickening crunch. I carry the guilt of Brian's death like a physical weight. I was the leader. I was the expert. I made the decision to stay. I do not know what those things were. I have spent years on the internet, falling down rabbit holes of folklore and cryptozoology. I have read the stories. Dogman, Skinwalker, Wendigo. They are just names, labels for the impossible. All I know is that they are real. They are smart, they are strong, and they are masters of their domain. We were trespassers in their world, and we were treated as such. The old deputy was right. There are places in this world that are not meant for us. We go there armed with our maps, our technology, and our arrogance, thinking we have conquered the wild. But the wild is deep, and it keeps its secrets.
My only warning, the only thing I have left to offer, is this. If you are ever deep in the woods, and the forest goes silent, and you hear a sound you cannot identify, do not try to rationalize it. Do not be brave. Do not be proud.